We're coming close to finishing up this project, and in this video we're going to set up a win condition for our game. And to do that, we're going to kind of revisit how we spawn our enemies, and we're going to really make a more sophisticated enemy spawn prefab that allow us to more easily place where our enemies are going to be, and enemy spawner that'll tell us which is the actual last enemy in our game that will win the game and reload the level to effectively just start the level over again, and that'll be our win condition. So what we're going to do is we're going to revisit how our enemy spawn location script works. So I'm just going to delete them and just work with one right now. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to make a new prefab with this new enemy spawn location guy right here. For right now, I'm going to move Gambit out of the way here. And I have my Sentinel here. And I'm going to make sure he's zeroed out. He's in the 0 position. And I'm going to take this enemy spawn location that we see down here, and I'm also going to set it to 0. And I'm just going to reset all of its transforms. So now we'll just have a sphere that's lying right in the middle of our level floor right here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take my Sentinel here, and now I'm going to parent it under my enemy spawn location. So anytime I have a spawn location, it's going to bring my Sentinel with me. And we're going to start looking at our code and how we can make this all come together with this new kind of prefab. All right, so why don't we go ahead and get into our scripts real quick. All right, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our stat script. And in my stat script, let me bring it over, develop over. And in my stat script, I'm going to have a new public boolean, and we're going to call this enemy to win. And this little enemy to win boolean is going to determine whether or not this is the last enemy of our level that will trigger our win condition. And then we're going to come on down to our destroy right here. And what we're going to do is, instead of just destroying our game object, we're actually going to say we're going to destroy our transform.parent.game object. And the difference here is, instead of just destroying our Sentinel here, we're also going to destroy the thing it's parented to, which is our enemy spawn location. So that'll cover that with our health is below that. But we also have a new condition. Every time we defeat an enemy, we're going to do a new check. We're going to say if enemy to win equals true, then we're going to call a win condition. And let me go in. It's having a little bit of trouble with my syntax here. So I'm going to go in and input some brackets for that first if statement, just so as it's not as confusing. There we go. Oh. So now that I have my brackets set up the way I want them again, before I add any code here, I'm just going to say game over function here. And we'll come back to update what that's going to be in a second. The one thing we know we need to do is when an enemy's health falls to 0, we're going to destroy our parent object, which is our enemy spawn location object up here in our hierarchy. And then we're going to trigger a game over function. Now we're going to start really paying more attention to our game manager script over here. All right, so we're going to kind of do the same thing. We're going to set up the same kind of static game manager that we visited in our physics game, in which our game manager has a bunch of functions that we'll need to call throughout the different lines of code in our game. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a function in our game manager, and we're going to call it right here. So why don't we go ahead and set up our game manager with our singleton game object that we made in our physics puzzle game a while back. So to do that, I'm going to say public static, and then we're going to call back the script that we're working in, which is our game manager. I'm going to call it instance, and we're going to say equals null. And in my start, why don't we change that start to awake? And this is our singleton approach, basically saying we can only have one instance of my game manager in our scene. So if we'll say if instance, which is the variable we gave to our game manager up there, equals null, then we'll say instance equals this, which is this. It points back to the game manager object that we have in our hierarchy. And then we're going to have a else if instance does not equal this, meaning if our instance of our game object is not this, basically if there's two instances, then we're going to just destroy this game object because there'll be a duplicate game object in our scene. All right, so we've set up our singleton pattern for our game object now. Now we need to make some functions to set up our game over. So we're going to make two functions here. We're going to make a public void game over, like so. Let's give it those brackets. And we're going to say invoke reset. We're going to give it a reset time. So right now we have a few questions here, like what is reset and what is reset time? Well, why don't we jump back up here to the top of our game manager and make a public float and call this reset time. And I'm going to just go ahead and set this to 2.0f. Go ahead and give it a value. We can always reset this value in our inspector over here. And then we're going to make another function public, or actually it's just going to be a private function called reset. So void reset. And this reset is going to kind of do our work for us. We're going to take our time scale, and we're going to say, why don't we set it to time slowdown? And again, we're going to have to make a new variable, float time slowdown equals 0.5f, like so. And basically this time.scale will slow our game time down by half. You kind of give it that climatic slowdown, like you've just done something cool, slow down the game. And then we're going to reload our level by saying application.load level, parentheses, application.the loaded level with a lowercase, loaded level that we're on. So what this invoke does is it says, okay, I'm going to invoke this function after a certain amount of time, which is our reset time up there. We've kind of already given these values, so we don't have to worry about we're just giving it some generic initial values there. And our game manager is now set up really nicely. So we need to do one more thing. We need to be able to have the power in our enemy spawn location object here. We need to look at our enemy spawner script, and we need to make sure we're spawning the right kind of prefab. So I'm going to go ahead and reset this enemy to spawn refab. I'm going to set it to none. So have your enemy spawn location prefab that we were working on at the beginning of the video. Just set that value to none. And then we're just going to take the sentinel value and drop it in like that. And with my sentinel selected, I'm going to go down to stats and make sure enemy to win flag is set to false. All right, now we have to go up to our enemy spawn trigger script. And this is going to give us the power to set which enemy spawn is going to be our last enemy. So with that brought up, we're going to make a new public variable. So we're in enemy spawn trigger. And we're going to say public bool last enemy. And why don't we go ahead and just set it to false just to be sure. All right. And then we're going to say, what do we need to do? Well, if you remember, instead of instantiating our enemy prefab, look what we already have our sentinel in our scene. We're not instantiating anything because our sentinel is already attached to my spawner. So we need to have some way where this enemy won't show up until we spawn him. So that's where we're going to make a void await function. Let me do that again. So on void await, we're going to say enemy prefab to instantiate dot set active is going to be false. And basically what that does is it takes this sentinel that we have set to our enemy prefab to instantiate right there. You know what? That's not a very good variable name anymore because they're not instantiating it. So why don't we just say enemy prefab in general? And then we're just going to get rid of this whole line of code down here. See how this variable name is red anymore? We're just going to get rid of that. We're just going to get rid of all that code for whenever our trigger collider, enemy spawn trigger, collides with our enemy spawner. We're just going to get rid of that stuff. So we're going to say enemy prefab.setActive equals false, which will effectively take our sentinel and uncheck this little checkbox up here in our inspector. Our sentinel still exists in our scene. He's just, for all intents and purposes, isn't active. He exists, but he's not active. See how when I check this on and off? So that's what the setActive function does. It basically triggers this boolean right here on and off. So we're going to go ahead and leave that sentinel active, because when the game starts, when the game awakes, we're immediately going to set that enemy prefab to false. So he'll be turned off. So we're rocking and rolling. We're pretty much ready to go. So the first line of code, after we delete all that stuff, we're going to say enemy prefab set active. Now we're going to set it to true. And we have one more conditional check. If last enemy equals true. Okay. Last enemy was this flag we set up here. If that equals true, then we're going to access our stats script on our enemy prefab. So we're going to say stats, enemy stats. We're making that local variable that we can point to our stat script. Enemy prefab dot get component stat script, like so. Then we're going to say enemy stats dot enemy to win equals true. So what this does is, as soon as our trigger collides with our enemy spawner, it's going to set our enemy prefab to active, so our sentinel will show up. And then it's going to look and see if our last enemy flag right here is true or not. And if that's true, we're going to look at our enemy prefab stat script. And now our enemy stats, enemy to win, will equal true. And if you remember, we came down here. If enemy to win equals true, which we set in this trigger script right here, if that is true, then all we have to do now is call a game manager function for our game over, which is public void game over. So to do that, we say game manager dot instance, and then we're just going to call our game over function, like so. All right, so that should be all we need to do. Why don't we go ahead, and since we have all of our code set just right, we have our Sentinel stats updated, we haven't got any errors. I'm going to go to my prefabs folder. I'm going to keep my Sentinel prefab, but I'm going to make a new one. And I'm going to drag enemy spawn location down to a prefab. And now that whole enemy prefab, or that enemy spawn location, is now a prefab. So now I can use this new spawn location prefab and populate my game world with it. And I'm going to drop it into that enemy spawner group I had. Now I can take these spawners. Notice how in my scene view, my sentinels are just there. We don't have to rely on some random floating cube. And I'm just going to populate my game world right now. All right, I'm just going to put 3 enemies in right now. So what I need to do is, my last enemy, number 3 location, that is my last enemy in the game. So if we check that, then the code right here on enemy trigger with last enemy checked and my inspector right here, down on the bottom right, it's going to look and see after we set this enemy prefab to active, it's going to check and see if last enemy is set to true. And if that's so, we're going to access this Sentinel prefab attached to it. And we're going to access the stat script attached to this single Sentinel. Out of all 3 of these Sentinels, we're accessing our stat script here. And we're setting enemy to win equals true, which in our inspector right here, enemy to win will equal true whenever our 3rd Sentinel is set to active. All right. And then in our stat script right here, after we destroy our enemy, we're also going to look and see if enemy to win was true, which is our last enemy to win the game. And then we're going to call our game over script. So why don't we just play out the game and see if all of our hard work's paid off. So I'm going to go and make sure my gambit is set in a good spot. I'm just going to set him back to 0 here. And I'm going to take my camera controller and set it to 0 as well. You'll notice, though, that this enemy place of the sentinel is kind of behind this wall. Make sure that whenever you're placing your enemies now, your enemy spawn trigger has the chance to kind of knock into it. I'm also, since I've kind of rearranged the level, I need to have a camera stop set up here. So I'm going to bring that camera stop, and we're going to set my camera to stop right here until I kill this enemy. All stuff we covered in our last lesson. So I'm going to maximize this on play. Actually, I'm going to unmaximize this. So I want you guys to see what's going on with our enemy spawners up here. And I'm going to leave this sentinel visible so we can see the enemy to win. I'm just going to go ahead and expand all of these. So I want you guys to notice something. As soon as I press play, all of my sentinels here will be set to inactive. So I'll press play. It's compiling all my scripts. Spawn trigger has not been assigned. So it looks like we need to say something like, yep, that's what happened. We never assigned Sentinel to our new enemy prefab right here because we changed the name. So I'm just going to drag and drop my Sentinel prefab right there and hit apply. And that should update all of my enemy spawn location prefabs. So they all have their Sentinel attached. All right, so you'll notice that all the Sentinels have disappeared. So I'm going to walk forward. My trigger hit my enemy spawn location, so now my Sentinel is set to active. See the checkbox there? Notice how these other two Sentinels, they are not active. And since that wasn't the last enemy to win is not checked. So I just need to go through my level real quick and beat up this dude and beat him up fashion. All right. Notice how I'm progressing through the level. There we go. And the last enemies are instantiated. So that one's done. And you'll notice I'm going to pause the game real quick. This last Sentinel in our game, enemy to win is now checked to true. And my game manager, the reset time after 2 seconds, it will reset the level. And it's going to slow down the speed of the game by half. So let's see what happens when I defeat my last enemy in my level. Like so. And it resets my game. All right. All right. Good stuff, guys. I think we might need to do one more thing. After we loaded our level, there's really nothing. Basically, our time is set to half still. So it's almost like we need to have some kind of setup script in our game to reset the time on that. Let's see how we can fix that real quick, and we'll call it quits for this video. So I think to get our time to work correctly, we need to go back to our stat script right here. So when we call our game over, that's whenever we set our time scale. So we'll say time dot scale time or time scale. There we go. This is what was going on. To why don't we just say 0.5 F? So after we defeat our last enemy to win, that's when we'll change our time to 0.5. Then we'll call our game over. So let's go to our game over here. And then we'll say invoke reset time. And then our reset, that's when we'll set our time back to 1.0 F. That's where we were getting confused there. If you'll notice back on our physics puzzler, our reset not only loaded our level, but it set our time scale back to 1. So yeah, what we really needed to do was to, in our stat script for our win condition right here, we needed to set our time.scale to half of what we wanted. All right, so I think that should work. So let's test that out. All right, so let's press play. Test our game here. There's our first enemy. We're going to go up to him and beat him up. we'll progress to the next part of our stage. You can see my scene view. My new enemies are being loaded up. All right, go on to our next enemy. Took a hit. So after we defeat him, that's whenever we do something like that. All right, so that's looking pretty good. So our game is pretty much playable. It may not be the fanciest game, but we're ready to pretty much rock and roll with maybe calling this done. I do want to note that there will probably be some more videos that will maybe clean up some of the behavior. Let me get past this one guy and I'll show you what we're talking about. Our enemy AI is still not totally nailed down. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my sentinels. I'm going to select all my hitbox and attack boxes. I'm going to turn mesh render on them to on. All right. So when we get into the game, we'll now be able to see all the hitboxes going on. All right. And I want you guys to pay attention to our scene view here in our game. And you'll notice that when two enemies occupy the scene, their animations get messed up. Now they're on the right track. But you'll notice one thing. Their attack hitboxes are not firing off. There we go. Now they are. Now they're starting to fire off. Now that one's just staying. So what we're going to do, the next few videos, now they're not, oh, there they go, firing off again. But it's just not consistent. It's a bug. Sometimes their hitboxes are firing off. Sometimes they're just staying put. So maybe in the next video or so, we're going to look and see how we can kind of fix the behavior of our AI when two or more are on the screen here. It's just not the best kind of setup we got going on here. Look at that attack box is just permanently up. So we're going to look in to see how we can do some bug shooting. So this will give us plenty of experience with going back through our code and making some fixes and making some edits. And that'll basically be the end of our project, just some simple bug fixing stuff. All right, so there we go. Now we won. And we're going to reload our level. Okay, so that does it for this video. We're pretty much done. We're just going to fix a few more bugs in the game, and we'll have a fairly competent little beat 'em up. Yeah, we can take it further by adding more mechanics and everything. So if you guys want to, experiment with on your own after the class, if programming really interests you, this will be one of the games you can take even further. All right, so stay tuned, guys.